Drunk driving remains one of the deadliest choices a person can make behind the wheel. Every year, thousands of lives are lost or forever changed because someone decided to drive under the influence, turning what should have been an ordinary journey into a nightmare. In this list, we'll revisit 5 of the most horrifying DUI car crashes ever recorded. Incidents that not only claimed lives in the most tragic ways, but also exposed the chilling consequences of reckless decisions on the road. It was a quiet night on Long Island, May 2nd, 2023. Route 106 in Jericho was almost empty. For 4 teenagers riding home in an Alfa Romeo, it was supposed to be a victory lap of sorts. They had just celebrated another tennis win, laughing and dreaming about futures filled with scholarships, championships, maybe even national titles. 4 kids with endless possibilities ahead of them. But as they drove into the darkness, something was waiting for them. Something that would change everything in a single, violent second. Out of nowhere, a Dodge Ram TRX came charging down the wrong lane. A 6,000-pound missile tearing through the night at nearly 95 miles an hour. Behind the wheel was 36-year-old Amandeep Singh, drunk, high on cocaine, and completely out of control. He wasn't just driving, he was hunting without knowing it, steering death straight toward innocence. The impact was catastrophic. The Alfa Romeo was crushed in an instant. 2 of the boys, Ethan Falowitz and Drew Hassenbein, both just 14 years old, never had a chance. They were gone before help could even arrive. Their friends, Zachary and another classmate, somehow survived. Broken bones, head trauma, glass embedded in their skin, trauma that doesn't heal when the body does. And Singh, he didn't rush to help. He didn't check if the kids were alive. He crawled out of his mangled truck and ran, stumbling into the darkness like a coward. Police found him hiding behind a trash bin, reeking of tequila, mumbling nonsense, with blood that tested nearly twice the legal alcohol limit and laced with cocaine. This man had turned his truck into a weapon of mass destruction and then fled the battlefield. When the case finally hit the courtroom, the truth became even darker. Prosecutors revealed black box data from Singh's truck. At the moment of impact, he was still going 75 miles an hour. No attempt to brake, no hesitation, just pure, reckless speed. And yet, when he stood before the court in January 2025, after months of denial, his tears weren't for the children he killed. They were for himself. He sobbed about how his own life was over, as if he was the true victim. Imagine sitting in that courtroom. Imagine being Ethan's parents or Drew's parents, forced to listen as the man who stole their children's futures cried not for them, but for his own fate. Gary, Ethan's father, said it best. "This was avoidable. The state failed my son." And Drew's father thundered with rage. "He gave my son a death sentence and gave us a life sentence of grief." Even Zachary, the boy who had survived, called Singh what he was, a coward, a murderer. The sentence, 8 1/3 to 25 years in prison. A slap compared to the crime. Singh could one day walk free before he even turns 50. Meanwhile, Ethan and Drew are buried, their dreams silenced forever. Online, outrage erupted. How could someone so reckless, so dangerous, walk away with a punishment that light? How could justice feel so shallow when the crime was so heavy?
A driver who admitted to hitting and killing a pregnant woman while under the influence of drugs was sentenced today in Anaheim.
It was August night in Anaheim, California. The streets along Catella Avenue were quiet. For 23-year-old Yesenia Lisette Aguilar and her husband, James Alvarez, it was supposed to be nothing more than a peaceful evening walk. Yesenia was 35 weeks pregnant, just weeks away from meeting their baby girl, already named Adeline. But fate had something else waiting for them. From the opposite direction came a Jeep SUV, swerving dangerously close to the sidewalk. Behind the wheel was 44-year-old Courtney Pandolfi, a woman who had been warned again and again about the destruction her reckless choices could cause. Multiple prior DUI convictions, years of arrests, even a Watson advisement, a legal warning that if she ever drove drunk again and killed someone, it would be treated as murder. And yet here she was, high on cocaine, methamphetamine, and other drugs, barreling straight toward them. The Jeep jumped the curb. In one instant, Yesenia was struck with such force that she was thrown to the ground, lifeless before paramedics could even try to save her. James was left standing in shock, watching his world shatter in front of him. At the hospital, doctors made a desperate decision. They performed an emergency C-section, fighting to save the unborn child. Against all odds, baby Adeline survived. She clung to life while her father was left to process the unthinkable. His daughter would grow up never knowing the woman who gave her life. But as the case moved forward, the story grew even more infuriating. Pandolfi's record revealed a long trail of destruction, years of chances, years of warnings ignored. It wasn't a tragic accident. It was inevitability. She had chosen to drive high and impaired over and over again until finally her selfishness ended with death. In February 2024, she finally pled guilty to second-degree murder, DUI causing injury, driving on a suspended license, and drug possession. On April 12th, she was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. For many, it still wasn't enough. How do you measure a sentence against the loss of a mother, the destruction of a family, the pain of a child who will grow up with only stories and pictures? At sentencing, James Alvarez stood in court holding baby Adeline in his arms. His voice cracked as he told Pandolfi, "I want you to see her face every single day. She will never know her mommy because of you." The courtroom was moved to tears. Even the judge admitted no punishment could ever fill the void. Today, Adeline is growing, a lively child with her mother's smile, but her story carries a haunting weight. She was born on September 20th, the very same date that marks her mother's death. Every birthday will forever be shadowed by tragedy, a reminder that her first breath came the same day her mother's was stolen.
I work in West Seattle, and every time I cross that bridge, I have to think about how my brother and his best friend were killed because they were trying to celebrate his birthday.
Devastating words from loved ones who will never fully heal.
The West Seattle Bridge for most drivers, it was just another ordinary commute. But for two best friends, Riley Denard and Ka Thuk, it was the last road they would ever take. They were only 18, just beginning their lives, returning home after celebrating Riley's birthday. A silver sedan appeared in the wrong lane, weaving dangerously as it sped closer and closer. Behind the wheel was 37-year-old Delfino Lopez Morales. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He was drunk. His blood alcohol content nearly doubled the legal limit at 0.14 with THC in his system. Witnesses had already called 911. Some even tried to flag him down, but nothing stopped him. Nothing slowed him. And in that instant, the headlights bore down on Riley and Ka like a nightmare coming to life. The crash was devastating. Lopez Morales slammed into their car at nearly 100 miles per hour. The sound of shattering glass and twisting steel echoed across the bridge. First responders later said it looked like the wreckage of an explosion, barely recognizable as two cars. Riley, who loved photography and music, who carried her camera everywhere to capture the beauty in small moments, gone. Kalia, who dreamed of becoming a nurse, the first in her family to attend college, gone. Two young lives erased in the blink of an eye. As investigators pieced the story together, the truth was even more infuriating. Lopez Morales had no valid driver's license. He was impaired by alcohol and drugs. He was speeding at highway levels in the wrong lane, and yet somehow he had still been able to get behind the wheel. This wasn't a chance. This wasn't bad luck. This was reckless inevitability. For more than a year, the case dragged through court. Finally, in September 2024, Lopez Morales pled guilty to 2 counts of vehicular homicide and 1 count of reckless driving. When sentencing came in November, the courtroom was overflowing. Friends, classmates, neighbors, entire rooms were filled with people mourning 2 teenagers who should have had their whole lives ahead of them. Riley's family spoke of her laughter, her kindness, the way she gave her time to everyone around her. Kalia's parents broke down as they described how their daughter would never wear her college sweatshirt, never cross a graduation stage. These weren't just stories. They were futures ripped away, dreams that would never unfold. And then came the defense. Lopez Morales' attorney argued he suffered from cerebral palsy, suggesting leniency. But to the families, to the community, it sounded like another insult. If he struggled with movement, if he mixed that with alcohol and drugs, how was he ever trusted to drive at all? Judge Angela Craik addressed the packed courtroom. She acknowledged that one reckless choice doesn't define a person, but that night, his choice had destroyed lives and futures. Then she handed down the maximum penalty allowed under Washington law, 148 months, just over 12 years in prison, followed by 18 months of community custody. 12 years. That was all. A man who killed 2 girls at nearly 100 miles an hour, drunk, high, and going the wrong way, could be free before his 50th birthday. For the families, it was unbearable. The sentence felt like a second wound. Justice too light for a loss too heavy. Riley and Kalia's story is not just about a crash. It's about a system that allowed a man like this to keep driving until tragedy was unavoidable. It's about how even the maximum punishment can never come close to the real sentence, the one their families now carry forever. Empty birthdays, graduations that will never come, a lifetime of milestones stolen before they even began. Two teenagers went out to celebrate life. Instead, they became another chapter in America's endless book of DUI tragedies. And for those who loved them, the punishment will never be measured in years. It will be measured in everything Riley and Kalia should have lived for, but never will.
Breaking news right now. We just learned 3 GCU students were killed in a deadly wrong-way crash this morning on the I-17 north of the Valley.
On October 10th, 2022, Interstate 17 near New River stretched quiet through the desert. 3 college roommates were on their way north for a simple adventure, to watch the sun rise over the Grand Canyon. It should have been the kind of carefree trip that becomes a lifelong memory. Instead, it turned into one of Arizona's most haunting tragedies. Out of the darkness came a silver vehicle, barreling down the wrong side of the freeway. Behind the wheel was 27-year-old Vincent Ian Acosta. He wasn't tired. He wasn't lost. He was drunk. His blood alcohol content nearly twice the legal limit at 0.129, with marijuana in his system. Drivers who saw him weaving across the lanes frantically called 911. Some tried flashing their headlights, hoping to warn others. But before help could arrive, it was already too late. The Honda Accord carrying the 3 students never stood a chance. The impact was sudden, violent, an explosion of steel and glass that echoed through the desert silence. By the time first responders arrived, 2 lives were already gone. 18-year-olds Abana Abi Hoffman and Magdalene Maggie Ogden died instantly. Their roommate, 19-year-old Elaine Hunter Balberti, was rushed to the hospital, but her fight ended days later. They weren't just victims, they were best friends. Roommates bound together by dreams bigger than themselves. Abby and Maggie had left their small town of Clarkston, Washington, eager to start fresh at Grand Canyon University. Elaine had come from Hawaii, the first in her family to pursue college, carrying the pride and hopes of her community. 3 futures that could have stretched for decades were stolen in seconds, and like in so many of these tragedies, the man who caused it lived. When investigators reconstructed the crash, the truth was unbearable. Acosta had been driving the wrong way for miles, unchecked, with nothing to stop him. That stretch of I-17 had no median barriers, no fencing, no safeguards to prevent disaster. Locals had complained about it for years. Their warnings had gone unanswered until the inevitable happened. The case dragged on for nearly 2 years, while the families carried grief that time could not dull. Bedrooms remained untouched, waiting for children who would never come home. Birthdays passed uncelebrated. Graduation gowns remained unworn. In January 2025, the courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered words no parent ever wants to hear. There is no sentence I can hand down that will do what every one of you wishes, to bring your daughters back. Acosta pled guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder. His punishment? 22 years in prison. With time served, he could walk free again while still middle-aged. The families will never get that kind of reprieve. Maggie's father said it felt like his heart had been stolen. Abby's stepfather described her as a bright light extinguished far too soon. Elaine's family held vigils by the ocean, chanting prayers into the waves for the daughter they would never embrace again. On the campus of Grand Canyon University, classmates gathered with candles. Mourning peers they barely had time to know. 3 young women who had set out to witness a sunrise instead became memories, their lives frozen in photographs and unfinished dreams. And as cars rush along I-17 today, the question lingers in the desert air. How many more lives have to be lost before we realize these tragedies are never accidents? They are choices, failures, and silences that kill. It was a quiet spring night in May 2017, the kind where the Michigan countryside feels timeless, fields stretching wide, the roads nearly empty, and silence settling over Ocola Township. But at the intersection of M59 and Argentine Road, that silence was shattered in the most violent way possible. In seconds, one man's selfish decision turned an ordinary evening into one of the deadliest DUI crashes Michigan has ever seen. The driver was 22-year-old Matthew Carrier. He had no valid license, yet he climbed into his car after drinking heavily. His blood alcohol level later measured at 0.15-, nearly twice the legal limit. Instead of handing over his keys, he floored the accelerator, tearing through the township at almost 100 miles per hour. Witnesses saw his headlights streaking like a ghost through the night. He reached the stop sign at M59, but he never slowed down. No brake lights, no hesitation, just pure, reckless momentum. At that very moment, another vehicle was crossing the intersection. Inside were people simply trying to get home. They had no warning, no chance to react. Carrier's car slammed into them with catastrophic force, ripping their vehicle apart and scattering debris across hundreds of feet of roadway. By the time first responders arrived, the scene was a nightmare. 5 people dead, 2 more badly injured, lives erased in the blink of an eye. Among the dead was Candace Dunn, just 35 years old, who hours earlier had stood proudly on a stage accepting Michigan's award for Probation Agent of the Year. Beside her, her mother, 69-year-old Linda Hurley, and Linda's longtime boyfriend, 73-year-old Jerome Tortomasi. Also gone were 20-year-old Justin Henderson, with his entire life ahead of him, and 24-year-old Preston Wetzel, who never made it back home that night. In a single instant, one family line was wiped out, and a community was left reeling. When Matthew Carrier finally faced trial, prosecutors laid out the facts like cold steel. Drunk, nearly double the limit, no license, flying 100 miles per hour through a 55 zone, and blowing through a stop sign. This wasn't an accident. It was arrogance and alcohol fused into something lethal. In court, the grief spilled into raw words. Survivor Albert Boswell faced Carrier and said, "Not only did you take this from me, but you took the chance to grow this from me." Michelle Ruard, speaking for the families, told him, "I want you to wake up every morning and think of the lives you've lost." In October 2018, Judge Michael P. Hattie handed down a sentence of 32 to 60 years, ensuring Carrier wouldn't see the outside world until he was at least 55. For some, it was a relief, but for the families, it didn't change the empty chairs, the birthdays that would never be celebrated, the grandchildren who would grow up never knowing their loved ones. The courtroom was filled with both justice and unbearable grief, 2 things that can never balance each other. And in the cruelest twist of fate, Candace Dunn, honored that very evening for helping others rebuild their lives and avoid prison, was killed only hours later by a man who never should have been on the road. Her death, along with the others, stands as a devastating reminder. Drunk driving doesn't just steal strangers. It rips apart families, destroys legacies, and leaves communities hollowed out. The crash in Michigan proves one haunting truth. When someone chooses to drink and drive, they aren't just gambling with their own life. They are gambling with everyone else's. And the cost, as the families of Candace, Linda, Jerome, Justin, and Preston know too well, is far higher than the driver ever imagines.